Hi folks, welcome to EDU 390. My name is Cindy Dean and I'm your instructor for this course. This slideshow is meant to just to give you an introduction and an overview of what we mean by methods and some of the excerpts from some of the content area texts, just to give us a sense of what is it exactly that we're going to be doing in this class and why is methods required by the state for certification. So bear with me, and we're going to go through these slides, and I'm going to just narrate a little bit. So what exactly is meant by methods? So for me, methods is a way of teaching. It's the procedures we use. It's the strategies we use to teach. It's not just the what, it's the how. So in other words, we're not just teaching stuff. We're not just teaching English language, arts, or science, or math. We're teaching students how to use these content areas in their worlds. Many of us have been in classrooms where we've had very, very good teachers that we want to emulate. Some of us have been in classrooms with teachers that we didn't care for, whom we don't want to emulate. So the ways in which we position ourselves in the classroom has a lot to do with what we experienced in the classroom as well. And I'll ask you to sort of suspend that a bit, to think about other ways of teaching. Not that the ways in which that you were taught are not good, and it may be that the things that we investigate in this course coincide with what you feel are good teaching strategies. But nonetheless, we're going to look at effective teaching practices, effective ways of planning to teach. All of these things are influenced by learning theory, by personal philosophy, past educational experience, as I noted, our own attitudes towards the students in front of us, or a classroom, or teaching, or the politics around teaching, our expectations, and what we know about our content knowledge. So if I kind of sum that up a bit, really what we're looking at is a participatory, a collaborative, engaging curriculum that sparks student involvement, that sparks the construction of knowledge, not just the attainment of knowledge. In other words, students are not vessels to be filled. We have to help them construct knowledge. It helps them become critical thinkers, and that term is bandied about a lot these days. And by critical thinker, that means questioning something, not just taking something at face value, but really looking at why is this so, and to who is benefiting from this. Okay, it means a connection of learning to self, family, community, and the world. We live in a global society, so even though the political climate right now looks at school to job placement, and don't get me wrong, I certainly want all of our students to have positions in employment, but that's not always, exactly what teaching's all about. It's really more about creating a whole person, about expanding a person's horizon, about introducing them to a subject that they may not have thought that they were interested in, or helping them at least to see how that subject is important to them and how they might use it. So as you already know, when you signed up for this course, there were letter designations after the 390 that indicated the content area. But in reality, this is a general methods course. The letters are there to designate on your transcript to make it easier for you when you go to be certified, so the certification office can see which content area you concentrated in. Before we had the letter designations, I had to write letters, which was time-consuming and really unnecessary. So having the letters really works. However, we're going to learn together. So we have people from various content areas, and the reason we do this is because we believe that effective teaching practices crosses disciplinary borders. It doesn't mean that there aren't some specific methodology or strategies one uses in, say, mathematics that one may not use in social studies, but there's a lot more that are cross-disciplinary than are not. So by learning from one another, we're going to celebrate the spirit of collegiality by sharing what we learn and sharing what we do in our own content area classrooms, or what we want to do in our own content area classroom. It breaks down that silo of disciplines. More and more we are moving towards interdisciplinary learning, not just at the college level, but at the high school level as well. That's being encouraged, that while we have these individual subjects, the standards movement and proficiency-based learning really encourages us to be cross-disciplinary and think about ways in which one might read science texts in an English classroom or use math in an art classroom. So really, by sharing our practices, we're going to help to break down those silos. Now, when you go into a school, I'm not telling you the silos aren't there, because they certainly are. They're there, they're entrenched, but I think they're degrading too. I think as we new people move into the classroom who have had the experience and the training of interdisciplinary work, that those silos will start to come down a bit. At least I hope so. At least I'm trying to do my part here for you. This also offers various perspectives. Now, some of you may already be in a classroom teaching as a full-time teacher. Others of you may have been doing long-term substitution teaching. Others have been ed techs. Some are coming, and haven't had a lot of classroom experience, except for maybe some observation. But we all have perspectives, and we're all going to be able to share those with one another. And above all, it encourages cooperation. And this always happens in this class, that students begin to share what they've learned. They find information that they then share with their peers. Through discussion forums, they'll discover that one particular student is interested in, say, restorative justice, and another student may have done some work in that or found a website and share that. So I encourage cooperation, and I think the idea of a general methods course encourages cooperation as well. So thinking about what do we teach, okay? Now, most people will say, well, I teach science, I teach math, I teach art, I teach social studies, I teach health, I teach English. True, you do teach that content area, but above and beyond that, you also are teaching students to think, to problem solve, to cooperate, to persevere. This is huge. Perseverance for young people is huge. They give up so easily. We have to construct our instructional plan so that we encourage perseverance, and we don't make it so onerous that they can't persevere. Okay, we make it rigorous, but not so much that they can't continue to work towards a goal. We teach them to collaborate, and we teach them knowledge. So the knowledge really comes at the bottom of this hierarchy. That will come once they've learned how to think, problem solve, cooperate, persevere, and collaborate within, through, and among our disciplines. So we do it through our disciplines, okay, and also among. Who do we teach? This is huge too. We have diverse groups of students at many levels of academic development, maturity, and content understanding. They come from many background, cultures, and familial situations. 20 years ago, we would be looking mostly at a homogeneous classroom where everybody kind of looked the same, they kind of came from the same neighborhood. There'd be a few sort of outlier students that maybe didn't quite look or act or feel the same as the others. But those days are gone, and it's a good thing, because these diverse classrooms really are much more rich in terms of cultural and the backgrounds, the ethnic backgrounds, but it also is challenging too, because we have to be able to reach all of these different students. Socioeconomic status in the state of Maine is huge, and that is a research proven factor in a student's readiness for learning and their ability to be at an academic level that is appropriate for their age. And we know that they're not always there. So we have to realize that we have this diverse group of students. You've all taken the exceptionalities course, whether it was the EDU 387 at UMA or at another institution, so you've had some background at what it means to have a diverse group of students in front of you. In this course, you're going to be working to differentiate some of your lesson plans. And granted, you don't know who the students will be in front of you, but you have to have a contingency plan. So I'm going to be asking you throughout this course to think about, you've got a general lesson plan here, how might it be differentiated for various purposes. So given all these variables, how do we teach effectively? So each of your content areas has a specific textbook, and you're going to be reading those independently, and I've tried to line up the textbooks chapters so that the same topic is being addressed each week. I wasn't always successful because they didn't all cooperate with me, but I'm pretty close. So I've read all these books. I think they're good books. I think they all give good information. Some are a little more in-depth than others in certain areas, but for the most part, they all advocate for a constructivist sociocultural construction of learning methodology, which is what this course is based on. So I've compiled some kernels of information from your first reading assignments, just to sort of help you think about the commonalities that the authors have to say about effective teaching. I'm going to begin with mathematics. Mathematics is a subject that teachers often have a difficult time thinking about constructivist learning. because it's a very linear process. In other words, you have to learn to be able to multiply before you can divide. You have to be able to do those things before you can do algebraic equations. And it's true, there are some prerequisites for moving on in mathematics. But I'm going to argue that that a more holistic look at mathematics, and whole to part rather than part to whole, might be worthy of looking at. Okay, and we'll talk more about that later on. But for now, here are some quotes from this particular mathematics textbook. An ineffective teacher is someone who is into math and happens to be teaching. Now, I've had some people argue with me on this statement and said, no, that's not true. You know, I'm totally into math and I'm a really good teacher. That may be true, but generally speaking, okay, we're not painting everybody with the same brush, but generally, if you really, really love your content area, whether it's math or biology and so forth, if you don't know how to teach it, then you're going to be ineffective. And I've seen a lot of people, both at the high school and college level, who clearly are experts in their field. They know so much about their field, and they're enthusiastic about it, but they don't know how to teach it. They don't know how to reach young people. They don't know how to help young people be as enthusiastic as they are about their content area. An effective teacher is interested in teaching and doing math. So there has to be a combination, okay? There has to be an interest in pedagogy, and there has to be an interest in the content area, okay? And those two together then create an effective teacher. There are other things that have to happen too, but those are the primary factors. And so I agree with what Rock and Brumbaugh say in this textbook about not just math. I'm not picking on just math here, but I chose this because you could plug in any content area here. That, you know, you could be totally into your content area, but if you don't have an interest in pedagogy and in learning good teaching strategies, then you're not going to be effective. So what do you need to do to become a competent teacher of mathematics? Sorry, got my pronouns mixed up there, I apologize. So, and again, I'm going to argue that we can substitute any content area here for mathematics. Believe that all can learn. If we don't believe that all students can learn, we're going to have a lot of trouble. Be enthusiastic and have a good attitude. That can be challenging some days, but you know, that's what teachers have to do. They have to bring their game. Develop competency in math. Again, I'm going to argue that we can substitute any content area there. You've got to have competency in what you're doing. You have to understand your students. You have to have effective lesson plans, and this course is going to help you do that. Detailed, effective lesson plans that you will need as you begin teaching. After you've taught for 10 or 15 years, you may be able to sort of sidestep some of the steps, but all teachers have some sort of an effective lesson plan. Okay? Show sensitivity towards students. Be reflective. This is very important. It's very important to step back and say, did this work? And if it didn't, why didn't it? It's really easy to blame the kids and to say, well, it didn't work because they didn't do their homework. It didn't work because they didn't pay attention. It didn't work because they don't care. That doesn't work. What do you need to do to help them become engaged in the topic? What can you do to help them do their homework? And why are you giving them homework? Is it just for practice, or is it meant to do something? So be reflective about your own teaching practices. Don't be just an answer machine. And this is really easy to do in math because you know your content so well, you just are itching to give them the answer, you know, when they're struggling to do, 5 times 7 and you know what it is, and they're really struggling. But let them figure it out. If they don't struggle with it, then, they're not going to be able to do it. Now, that doesn't mean that if they're doing some sort of a problem or that they really are missing some pieces that you can't help them. But you don't want to just fire off the answers at a drop of a hat. Kids are really good at waiting, and they let the teacher be the answer machine. Use varied strategies. We can't have just one strategy in teaching, and we're going to learn a lot about those various strategies. I'm going to be providing with lots of material for you to investigate. I'm not going to talk about each one because that would take, forever, and you don't want to hear me talk forever. But I'm going to be giving you lots of information throughout the course about ways in which you can use varied strategies. Don't use lecture as the only method of instruction, says I as I am lecturing you, and I apologize for that. Were we together in a classroom, I'd be stopping to ask questions and having some interaction, but the online nature of this course requires me to sort of give you that information and then invite you to ask questions through an asynchronous way. Show the role of math in the real world. This is so huge, people. And again, not just math, science, art, social studies. How do you use this in the real world? How do you use math in the real world? What's trigonometry all about? Why do I have to learn all this stuff? And how am I going to use a quadratic equation in the real world? if students know how to use what the math is used for, they'll be more willing to learn it. Example is I had a pool put in a couple years ago, and watching them measure and taking square roots and making sure it was square was this is math in the real world, and I was putting it away in my memory for thinking about helping students to think about the role of any kind of a content area authentically in the world. Expand concepts or definitions. Analyze a problem in more than one way. There's a lot of conversation, some good and some not so good, around Common Core math standards and ways in which young people are being taught to do math in ways that don't look like the way a parent might have done math in school. And so what it's doing is it's trying to provide multiple ways of answering a question, solving a problem. There's nothing wrong with that. The ways in which we might have learned is one way, but there are other ways. So it's not bad to learn other ways. And use an idea in more than one setting. So helping students to see how math might be used in one setting and another setting, so that they don't see it as just, well, I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to put a pool in, so I don't need to know square roots. Doesn't help them. How would square roots be used in another context? Use models that enhance understanding. Models are very important, not only for mathematics, but for any content area. Provide examples of application and use a model in more than one way. And these are the pages from which I took these little kernels of information from that math textbook. Learning theory, also from the math text. So I've got quite a bit here from the math text, and because I'm very impressed with the methods text. I really am, because it really does embrace a constructivist stance in helping students to learn math. There is no enchanted formula that fits every learner, and we know this. We know that we cannot teach the same way to every student. And so this text gives a nice overview of two sort of major schools of thought, and this really applies to everyone, doesn't apply just to math people. There's behavioralism and constructivism. You've heard me say constructivism several times in this PowerPoint presentation. So let's jump to that. Constructivism is when children learn through interactions with experiences in their natural environment. So they're not just sitting in a chair having things sort of thrown at them. They're learning through interactions with experiences in their natural environment. Teacher creates an environment that encourages learning. Teacher creates surroundings where students can make sense of mathematics as it relates to the world. That concept, that idea of placing learning in the real world is going to come back again and again and again. And you're going to have to remember that when you construct your unit plans, that there has to be connection to the real world. What is the impact on students learning a procedure without conceptually grasping the reason for it? And again, for mathematics, this happens a lot. We teach students how to solve equations or express equations or solve a problem without explaining to them why we're asking them to do it. Implementation of learning theory is not easy because we have test-driven curriculum. We are in a over our heads in test-driven curriculum right now, although the political climate is changing. I think that if the No Child Left Behind is reauthorized in some shape, form, we'll see less testing. We'll still have testing, but there'll be less testing. We have text-driven curriculum where teachers are following a text slavishly from beginning to end, and math is often guilty of this, and sometimes rightly so, because it's a linear process of learning a concept, a skill, and moving on to another one. But that doesn't mean that teachers can't kind of mix it up a little bit. And then we have teacher-driven curriculum. So with these three things going on, it's kind of difficult to think about learning theory. Which do we do? How do we integrate all of them? How do we make sense of them? How do we maybe resist one of those? So the current model is teacher as expert. Okay, what teachers do is they tell students what and how to do it. We really have to get rid of that. Okay, it is imperative that the current model used in many classrooms be abandoned if we are to have mathematical growth for all students. The teacher can't just be the teller of information. Students cannot be sitting passively and receiving this information in what Paulo Freire called the banking model of education, where students showed up every day to get their daily deposit of education. It does not work. Students need to be able to understand how to use it. They have to work with it. They have to know what it's used for. If we want all students to succeed, we've always had some students who are high flyers who've done really well at math, They've taken to math because some reason, sometimes it's just a lineal process. Some people have a very lineal thinking. Others have been able to understand how math is used in the real world, and somehow along the way, someone has helped them to know that, so it makes more sense to them. But for all students, we really have to abandon that current model of teacher as expert. And again, there are many pressures on curriculum. It makes it even more difficult. We have this external pressure from society, text, tradition. Traditionally, math is taught as a series of concepts and skills. You learn one thing, then you learn something else, then you learn something else, and it accumulates to the point where then you're doing more advanced math. We've got internal pressure from textbooks, from the ACT and SAT tests, Smarter Balance, and tradition. Now, Smarter Balance is now gone in the state of Maine. It was the legislature voted it out last spring, but we will have a new assessment coming up. I don't know what it'll be. They're looking for it now. I don't know if we'll have one for this year, or who knows what's going to happen, but Smarter Balance is no longer there for Maine, although it is still out there in the nation for some states. There's tangential pressure, again, tradition, administration, parents, businesses. So teachers really are sort of very much under the gun here about everybody wants a teacher to be what he or she wants the teacher to be. And we can't be everything to everybody. We have to be true to ourselves and to our beliefs in our students and our beliefs in our pedagogy. But we also have to take in consideration all these other things. So it's not an easy thing to do. So that's it for math. Let's talk about some of the stuff in the social studies texts. Again, I'm going to invite you to think about how these kind of, these really cross over disciplines. Teaching is more than lecturing. You've heard this before. Your personal experience as a student influences how you approach teaching. You've heard this before. And your social, economic, and political experiences will influence how you approach teaching. Very important. Where you came from, your socioeconomic status growing up, and your socioeconomic status now, your political experience, these all will influence how you approach teaching and what you believe in teaching. To develop good citizens for the democratic society in which we live. This is the purpose of teaching. This would make sense for a social studies teacher, and we do want to develop good citizens. But it makes sense for any other content area. Social studies is integrated study of social sciences and humanities to promote civic competence. So again, citizenship, civic duty. There is controversy in social studies due to cultural change, differing values and viewpoints, special interest, group influence, and a changing body of knowledge. We can't just teach Western culture anymore, and we can't just teach it from a Western viewpoint, from a colonial viewpoint. We have to look at social studies from many, many different cultural aspects, especially in our growing, diverse classroom. On constructivism, again, we've talked about behaviorism and constructivism through the math lens. Let's talk about it through social studies. Need to cast aside behavioralism that posits learning occurs through systematic stimulus and response, punishment and rewards. That's what behavioralism does. In other words, if you do what I say you do, you get a reward. If you don't do what I say to do, you get a punishment. If you do all of your homework, you get a good grade. If you don't do all your homework, you get a bad grade. So we have to really think about how that works against what we want students to do in terms of constructing knowledge and engaging in knowledge. So knowledge is the result of assimilating any new information, ideas, and experiences encountered to give them meaning. New information has to make sense with and tie into what the learner already knows to give them meaning. This is the scaffolding piece. This is where we have to think about what do my students know? Where are they in terms of what this knowledge I want them to acquire? What do I need to do to help them get to a point where it does make sense to them? I often use this example in reading, that I'm a very good reader. You could give me a book on nuclear physics and I could read it well and with emotion. I could pronounce the words because I'm really good at sort of sounding out the phonics of words. I know nothing about that topic, so it wouldn't make any sense to me. I could read it, but I don't know what to do with it. I would have to do an awful lot of scaffolding and other work to get to a point where it made sense to me. And oftentimes this is exactly what we do to students. We give them something to read, or we give them something, a lecture, or something to view, something to do. They have no idea how to do it. They don't have what they need to be able to engage in that. So we'll talk more about that in terms of Vygotskian theory about scaffolding learning. But keep that in mind as you're thinking about planning your unit plan. All right, so let's move on to science. So what's the purpose of teaching science? Is it to deliver content, develop interest, or is it both? I'm going to argue it's both. We want them to be able to know some of these scientific concepts. We want them to be interested in it too, and to know, have some wonder about it. So it's not just, again, giving them stuff. It's helping them develop interest in and developing, constructing knowledge. So when planning, should we keep our audience in mind, set learning outcomes for everyone? When teaching, do we consider our students' prior knowledge and experience, ability, and context, or do we teach one way to all students? Again, we have to keep our audience in mind. Who are the students in front of us? It might not be the same group of students we had last year, the same kinds of students, I should say. They may need different learning outcomes. Within the individual classroom, they may be individual learning outcomes needed. We certainly have to understand our students' prior knowledge and experience, ability, and context, and we can't teach one way to all students. This is where differentiation comes in. So again, from the science test, some attitudes and observations. Differences between veteran and new teachers. Often there is dissonance in what you believe instruction should look like and how it has taken place. This happens often in student teaching when students go into the classroom and often see that teaching is not looking like the ways in which they had envisioned it should look, or the ways in which they were instructed it should look. And this happens because there are veteran teachers in the classroom who have not upgraded their pedagogical stance. This is a place for reflection and growth. Okay, this is where we can really think about how to grow. I am here to teach science, not reading, writing, or civics. This is often something that not just comes out of the mouths of science teachers, but math teachers, art teachers. I'm here to teach my content. I don't need to teach reading, writing, or civics, but that's not true. Because in order for students to engage in science, they have to be able to read like a scientist. They have to know what important points to look for. You don't read a scientific article like you would a novel. They have to know how to be a writer in science. And they have to understand the connection of science to civic responsibility. Science curriculum is overstuffed and undernourished. I'm going to agree there. I think most curriculums are overstuffed and undernourished. In other words, we try to cover too much rather than picking key concepts and ideas and really, really enriching that and helping students to really gain some understanding of that. Science should be taught as inquiry. I'm going to argue that all content areas should be taught as inquiry. If we give students a question to investigate, that's going to give them some interest in the content area. All right, so from English. What does it mean to teach English given our current society? English teachers should develop in students bodies of knowledge and ways of seeing, thinking, and communicating. Notice it doesn't say that English teachers should teach, X number of books and what books they should teach. That's not the point. The point is that through literature and writing, that students are going to develop bodies of knowledge and ways of seeing, thinking, communicating. English teachers are storytellers, philosophers, historians, anthropologists, reporters, critics, designers, and travelers. I have a good friend who says that English is like the kitchen sink. It's everything thrown into it. English teachers should see students as apprentices to the discipline, and I'm going to argue that we all should do that. All content areas should see their students as apprentices to the discipline. If we do that, we'll pay more attention in helping them to become experts. English teachers don't exist solely to prepare students for the workplace, nor do they act as a pit stop for other disciplines. All disciplines must play a part in developing academic literacies. Often we hear, teaching you to write is the English teacher's job. Teaching you to read is the English teacher's job. But that's not true, as I noted before. English teachers certainly do need to teach reading and writing, but the content area specialists are the ones who need to help students understand what does it mean to write as a scientist or a social studies or a historian. What does it mean to read as a scientist or a mathematician? Okay, those are the things the literacies that content area teachers need to help students with as well. English teachers should link school to a purpose that has meaning to students. We've talked about that before. Not try to cover everything. We've talked about that before too. Connect experts in the community. This is very important. This does not come out before. But connecting students to experts in the community, and that is so much easier now that we have virtual ways of doing that. So connecting them to, an expert in, say, bioethics, Finding a webinar that students can look. PBS has some great things on that. TED Talks have great things on that. And it may be that you have someone local in your community that you can invite in. But helping students to see someone practicing the concepts and ideas that you're trying to teach them in the community will really help them to be better invested in it. Give them choices about how to learn. Organize learning around themes, projects, and questions. And I've already given you my bias that I like questions on inquiry. But I'm not going to make you do that if you prefer doing a theme or a project. But there does have to be an organization feature for your unit plans. Okay, let's look at art. So art teaches how to make good judgments. Problems have more than one solution. Multiple perspectives. How to say what cannot be said. This is really, I love this, how to say what cannot be said. So what cannot be verbalized, in art really does that, visually expressing something. About making new meaning, thus providing students with tools to help them become better people. Art isn't just about making things, and I agree. Art can really go across the disciplines in terms of what it helps us to do. So go back and substitute the name of your discipline in each one of the slides. I kind of did that for you along the way. What do you notice? Everything each text offered in terms of discipline-specific advice pertains to all disciplines. So that should help you think about why we have a general methods course and why I ask you to learn together and share your effective practices. So, you already have a wealth of content knowledge. You wouldn't be here if you didn't. You already need to have your content knowledge. That's a prerequisite for this course, that you have, if you are taking this for English, that you have at least 24 credits of English in your background, if not more. And the same thing for all the other content areas, that you already are an expert in your content knowledge. Not that you can't learn any more about it, but you have a level of knowledge that is sufficient for you to begin to think about how do I teach this knowledge. We have learning theories and standards to guide our work. So we're not shooting in the dark here. We're going to be thinking about learning theories, about how the different students learn and ways in which we can use these learning theories. We're going to use the standards to guide our work. We have guidebooks written by experts in our respective fields to assist us. These are the textbooks that you have, and each of the content areas has a lot of information. Some of it is very much the same, some of it's a bit different. Some give a lesson plan templates that are interesting, but nonetheless, we have these guidebooks to help us. And we have a community of practice. We are a community of practice. Communities of practice are groups of people who share a concern or a passion for something they do and learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. And that's what you're going to do over the next 15 weeks as a community of practice. So let our work begin. This video is Tailor-Mal, and it won't work in this PowerPoint, but I've given it to you. I don't know why I didn't embed it correctly, but I've given it to you separately so you can look at it. It's a little in your face, but it really is a favorite of teachers. And I think it's a good way for us to start the semester about what do teachers do. With that, I wish you all a good day.